The spark before the inferno. The galaxy was on the brink. For centuries, the Zalrith Dominion had ruled uncontested, their iron grip stretching across thousands of systems. No species had ever dared challenge them, for those who did were crushed into oblivion. But now, a single battle had changed everything. The Battle of Orion's Verge had been an impossibility, a victory where there should have been only annihilation. Humanity, an upstart race barely a few centuries into spacefaring, had shattered the illusion of Zalrith supremacy. The warlords of the Dominion had been humiliated. Now they would not be satisfied with a mere retaliation. They wanted an example. And so, they prepared the largest invasion force in recorded history, not for conquest, not for resources, for extermination. The Edge of Oblivion, TFS Vengeance, Orion's Verge, Terran Federation border space. Admiral James Calloway watched the swirling abyss of space beyond his viewport, his expression unreadable. The Zalrith fleet was coming. It was no longer a matter of if, only when. The TFS Vengeance, the Federation's largest and most powerful dreadnought, stood at the forefront of the defense. Around it, a fleet of battle-hardened Terran warships waited in tense silence. Every officer, every crew member, knew what was coming. They had seen the recordings. The Dominion didn't just invade planets, they erased them. And yet, no one hesitated, because if the Federation fell, Earth would be next. Calloway exhaled slowly. We will not fall. Unity Station, the War Council. The holographic display flickered, showing the galaxy in chilling detail. Red markers swarmed the outer colonies. The Zalrith fleet had already begun its advance. President Elias Grant sat at the head of the war table, his jaw tight. Around him, the most powerful figures in the Federation, admirals, generals, strategists, scientists, argued over the best course of action. We need to fortify the core worlds, said Defense Minister Alaric. Pull the fleets back. Focus on protecting Sol. That's suicide. General Cassandra Wolf leaned forward, her voice sharp. We pull back. We give them the outer systems. They will never stop. We fight here, now, or we lose everything. The room fell into tense silence. Calloway, standing near the edge of the table, finally spoke. There is no retreat, no surrender. His voice was quiet, but it carried. The Zalrith see us as insects. If we kneel, they will not spare us. There is only one path forward. Grant met his gaze. War. Calloway nodded. War. The unbreakable resolve of humanity. Across the Federation, war preparations began. On Mars, the shipyards burned with activity. Engineers worked tirelessly, constructing the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. On Titan, orbital weapons platforms were armed. Massive railgun batteries, capable of piercing even the strongest Zalrith dreadnoughts, were positioned around the core worlds. On every colony, civilians were evacuated. Families were torn apart. Fathers and mothers drafted into the Terran armed forces. Humanity had never fought a war like this before, but they would not fight it alone. The Battle of Orion's Verge had done more than enrage the Zalrith. It had shaken the galaxy. And now, whispers spread across the stars. Some species, long oppressed by the Dominion, saw an opportunity. Some saw hope. The first shot, TFS Vigilance, Outer Colony Defense Post. The lone sensor officer aboard the TFS Vigilance stared at his screen. His hands trembled as an alert flashed across the display. Multiple FTL signatures detected. Incoming fleet. He swallowed hard. His voice barely came out. Sir, they're here. A heavy silence filled the bridge. The captain turned toward the comms officer. Send the message. The words were simple. A warning, a declaration, a promise. To all Terran forces, the Zalrith have arrived. Prepare for war. Enjoying the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic HFY sci-fi adventures. What would you do? Stand and fight, or attempt peace with an enemy that sees you as nothing more than an insect? Let's discuss below. New Avalon, the first target. The sky over New Avalon was on fire. What had once been a thriving colony, home to over 12 million people, was now a battleground. Zalrith warships, sleek and insectoid in design, loomed above the planet like carrion birds. Their plasma lances screamed through the atmosphere, turning entire city blocks into molten slag. The planetary defense grid, once thought impenetrable, had lasted less than an hour. Now, all that remained was fire, smoke, and the desperate resistance of a world on the brink of annihilation. TFS Vengeance. In orbit above the battle, Admiral James Calloway gripped the edge of the command console, his jaw locked in fury as the holomap flickered before him. Red enemy signatures swarmed across the display. The Zalrith weren't attacking, they were erasing. New Avalon wasn't a military target, it wasn't a fortress world, it was a symbol, and the Zalrith had chosen extermination as their first message. "Admiral," a young officer called, voice tense, "we're receiving distress calls from the surface." Calloway closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He already knew what they were asking for. Help, reinforcements, salvation. But the Federation's fleet was outnumbered 3-1. "Send this message to all ships," he ordered. His voice was steel. "We are not abandoning that planet, not while there's still a single soul left breathing." He turned to his weapons officer. "All forward batteries, fire!" The battle begins. From the bridge of the TFS Vengeance, Calloway watched as hundreds of Terran warships surged forward like wolves hunting a larger predator. The first barrage of kinetic railgun rounds tore through the void, shattering the shields of several Zalrith cruisers. Explosions bloomed across the darkness of space as Terran forces made their first kill. But the enemy responded with equal ferocity. A Zalrith dreadnought, a massive war engine the size of a city, unleashed a plasma storm that ripped through an entire wing of Terran destroyers. The vacuum of space briefly ignited with blue flames as dozens of ships vanished in an instant. "Heavy casualties in formation, Alpha 7!" a tactical officer shouted. "They're cutting us down!" Calloway clenched his fists. "We don't have to beat them here," he muttered. "We just have to make them bleed." He turned to his comms officer. "Launch the Hell Jumpers." Operation Revenant. The Hell Jumpers drop high above New Avalon. The sky split open as thousands of Terran drop pods screamed downward. Inside one of them, Captain Elias Carter gripped the handles of his seat, feeling the brutal tremors as the pod plunged through the atmosphere. The Hell Jumpers, humanity's most elite shock troopers, were going in hot. Through his visor, Carter could see the burning remnants of Avalon City. The streets were a war zone, Terran soldiers fighting in the ruins, civilians running for their lives, Zalrith troops executing anyone they found. A voice crackled in his helmet. "Hit the ground running, Hell Jumpers!" The pod's doors exploded outward before it even hit the surface. Carter was already moving, boots slamming onto the battlefield. Blaster fire roared all around him as his squad engaged the enemy. They weren't here to hold the line. They were here to make the Zalrith pay. The price of resistance. For every Zalrith soldier that fell, another replaced him. For every street the Hell Jumpers cleared, another was lost. Carter knew it. They weren't winning, but they were stalling. And in war, sometimes that was enough. The turning point back in orbit, Calloway's trap was ready. The Zalrith fleet, confident in its superiority, had pushed deep into the system, leaving their flanks vulnerable. They had underestimated human desperation. "Now," Calloway commanded. From the hidden asteroid fields, the second half of the Terran fleet emerged, like predators lying in wait. The Zalrith realized their mistake too late. The counterattack was brutal. Terran railguns and nuclear payloads tore through their formation, turning the once invincible Zalrith armada into wreckage. The invasion of New Avalon had failed, and for the first time in galactic history, the Zalrith had been defeated in open battle. The aftermath. The cost was catastrophic. Half of New Avalon was gone. Entire cities were reduced to craters. The Terran fleet had suffered thousands of casualties, but the Zalrith had retreated, And that changed everything. The galaxy had just learned a terrifying truth. Humanity would not bow. They would fight. And if they had to, they would burn the stars to the ground. Final thought. A question for you. If you were in Calloway's place, would you risk your fleet to defend New Avalon, or sacrifice it for the greater war? Drop your thoughts below. Enjoying this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic HFY sci-fi adventures. The war had changed everything. The Battle of New Avalon had been a victory, but it had also been a warning. The Zalrith Dominion, once thought invincible, had bled. And when an empire bleeds, the galaxy takes notice. For the first time in recorded history, a species had stood against the Dominion and survived. Now, the war was no longer just about survival. It was about proving humanity's place in the stars. The War Council, Unity Station. The command room aboard Unity Station was silent as Admiral James Calloway took his seat at the war table. Around him sat the highest-ranking leaders of the Terran Federation: presidents, generals, fleet commanders, intelligence operatives, the architects of humanity's survival. At the center of the room, a holographic star map flickered to life, displaying the current state of the war. Red markers, Zalrith-controlled territories, stretched across vast sections of space. Blue markers, Terran forces, were few and scattered. They had fought, and they had won. But the next battle would be harder. President Elias Grant leaned forward, his voice heavy. "The Zalrith won't stop," he said. "We all know that. We hurt them. But they have more ships, more soldiers, more resources. If we fight them on their terms, they'll grind us into dust." A grim silence followed. General Cassandra Wolfe, a hardened veteran of the Martian uprising, crossed her arms. "Then we don't fight on their terms," she said. "We change the rules." A new kind of war. The Zalrith had centuries of tradition. They fought in grand fleet battles, using overwhelming force to crush their enemies. Humanity? Humanity had adaptation. They wouldn't fight this war the way the Zalrith expected. Hit-and-run tactics. Strike deep into enemy territory, destroy supply lines, and disappear before reinforcements arrive. Asymmetrical warfare. Use cloaked strike teams to sabotage key military targets, forcing the Zalrith to spread their forces thin. Psychological warfare. Exploit the Dominion's arrogance. Make them fear that humanity was everywhere and nowhere. Calloway stood. His voice was quiet, but filled with iron determination. "We don't need to win every battle. We just need to make every battle cost them more than they can afford." The council members exchanged glances. This was no longer just a war of survival. This was a war of attrition. A war the Zalrith weren't prepared for. The call to arms on Mars. New warships rolled out of the shipyards. Faster, stealthier, more heavily armed. On Europa, military engineers developed next-generation weaponry. Railguns capable of piercing Zalrith dreadnought armor. On Luna, thousands of recruits trained for deep strike missions. Infiltrators who could slip behind enemy lines and dismantle entire fleets from within. And across the galaxy, a whisper began to spread. The Zalrith can be beaten. The once terrified species of the Dominion began to take notice. For centuries, they had lived under the Zalrith's rule. But now they saw something they had never seen before. A chance. The first rebellion. It started on Velkaris 3, a Zalrith-controlled world far from the front lines. For decades, the Velkari people had lived as slaves, forced to mine resources for their overlords. But now they saw the Terran Federation's victory at New Avalon. They saw a path to freedom. And when the Federation sent a single encrypted message to their underground resistance, it contained just 3 words. "You are not alone." That was all it took. The Velkari revolt ignited overnight, overthrowing their Zalrith masters and declaring their allegiance to humanity. The moment that changed the war. For the first time, the Dominion faced something they had never encountered. A war on 2 fronts. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. Now, the Dominion's own subjects were rising against them. The war had changed, and the Zalrith, were not ready for it. Final thought. A question for you. If you were one of the oppressed species under the Zalrith, would you rise up knowing humanity had a chance to win? Or would you wait and see if they could survive? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Enjoying this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic HFY sci-fi adventures. The breaking point. For too long, humanity had fought on the defensive. No more. The war had turned. The Federation was no longer just surviving. It was striking back. The fall of New Avalon had enraged the people of Earth. The footage of civilians burned alive, of entire cities reduced to ash, had been broadcast across every colony, every outpost, every fleet. And humanity had one answer. Total war. Unity Station. The final decision. The Federation War Council sat in silence. On the holotable, a detailed hologram of Zalrith-controlled space flickered in the dimly lit room. Admiral James Calloway stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. "We have their supply routes mapped," he said. "We have their defensive weaknesses exposed. The Zalrith think we'll continue to fight in skirmishes, chipping away at them. They think we fear them." He turned to President Elias Grant. "They're wrong." The silence broke into murmurs. "We're not just going to fight them," Calloway continued, his voice like iron. "We're going to end them. Operation Stormbringer, the counterattack, begins." The first target was Zalrith Fleet Command at Dranthis 4, a fortified world, the beating heart of the Dominion's military logistics. For centuries, the Zalrith had ruled with overwhelming force. Their fleets crushed resistance before it could take root. Their ships were fearsome, their technology unparalleled. But they had never fought humans like this. The Terran Armada, newly reforged, descended upon Dranthis 4 like a hurricane. Stealth ships infiltrated the outer defenses, jamming communications and sabotaging planetary shields. Railgun salvos from Terran warships tore through Zalrith orbital stations, sending debris spiraling into the planet's atmosphere. Shock troopers deployed in waves, striking military bases, command centers, and infrastructure. The Zalrith defense fleet scrambled to respond. They failed. By the time they mounted a counterattack, the planet was already lost. For the first time in 1,000 years, a Zalrith stronghold had fallen. Fear spreads through the Dominion. The galaxy watched in disbelief. The Zalrith had told the other species that humanity was weak, that they would be eradicated. And yet, the Terran Federation was advancing. Zalrith governors began evacuating, fearing human retaliation. Some openly questioned their leadership. The war had changed. Humanity was no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. The assault on Zelrath Prime. The Federation's next target was Zelrath Prime, a critical manufacturing world. Without it, the Zalrith fleet would collapse. The Zalrith knew this. They had fortified the planet, surrounding it with a defensive grid strong enough to repel entire armadas. But Calloway wasn't playing by their rules. He didn't send the fleet straight in. Instead, he sent strike teams behind enemy lines, infiltrators who disabled planetary defenses before the main attack. By the time the fleet arrived, the once impenetrable world was defenseless. The assault was swift and brutal. Humanity did not hesitate. The moment that defined the war. As Zelrath burned, the final message was sent to the Zalrith High Command. A transmission. Calloway, standing on the bridge of his flagship, his face carved from stone. "You wanted war. You have it. This will not stop until every last one of your warlords lies dead. You will regret the day you thought humanity would kneel." The transmission cut. For the first time in their existence, the Zalrith knew fear. The wrath of Earth had begun, and nothing in the galaxy could stop it. A question for you: if you were leading the Terran Federation, would you stop at military targets or bring the war to the Zalrith homeworld itself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Enjoying this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic HFY sci-fi adventures. The brink of annihilation. The war had raged for 5 years. What had started as an attempted extermination had turned into an unrelenting war of attrition. Humanity had not just survived. They had pushed back, burned Zalrith worlds, shattered their fleets, and broken their grip on the galaxy. But the Dominion was not dead. And now, they were preparing for their final move. Unity Station, the warning. President Elias Grant stood in the dim glow of the War Council chamber, his face lined with exhaustion. Before him, the holographic star map pulsed with urgent red alerts. Admiral Calloway's voice was grim. They're mustering everything, every remaining warship, every last soldier. We believe they are planning a final offensive at Kezar Rift. Kezar Rift was a strategic choke point, the last true barrier before the core Terran colonies. If it fell, the Zalrith could strike directly at Earth. General Cassandra Wolfe leaned forward. If we lose Kezar, we lose everything. The room fell into silence. Calloway's voice was steel. Then we don't lose. The Battle of Kezar Rift begins. The Terran Armada, what remained of it, massed at Kezar Rift. 1,200 warships, dreadnoughts, carriers, cruisers, and frigates. 300,000 personnel, pilots, marines, helljumpers, engineers, each prepared to die if necessary. Hundreds of orbital platforms loaded with planetary defense weapons. Then came the Zalrith. 5,000 ships, their entire remaining fleet, more than 4 times the number of human vessels. The Zalrith had not come for a battle. They had come for a massacre. And yet, humanity did not run. They stood. Because they knew this was the moment that would decide the fate of the war. The inferno erupts. The first salvo turned the darkness of space into a sea of fire and destruction. Zalrith dreadnoughts fired planet-cracking plasma lances, incinerating human vessels in waves. Terran railguns and nuclear warheads tore through enemy formations, reducing entire Zalrith carriers to burning wreckage. The battlefield became chaos incarnate. The shields break. Despite their ferocity, the human lines began to crack. Zalrith warships pushed forward, overwhelming the flanks. On the bridge of the TFS Vengeance, Calloway's eyes remained cold as the fleet reports poured in. "Sir, we're losing the right flank." He turned to his second-in-command. "Then we take the fight to them." The Gambit. The Federation had one last trick. Calloway knew the Zalrith saw humans as predictable, as weaker strategists. He used that against them. Execute Operation Stormlance, the Death Charge. In a move that defied all military logic, half the Terran fleet charged directly into the center of the Zalrith Armada. It was suicide, or at least, that's what the Zalrith thought. But it was a trap. At the last moment, human ships activated emergency warp drives, flanking the Zalrith from behind. The Zalrith were surrounded, and then, humanity unleashed hell. Victory at a cost. By the end, the Zalrith fleet was annihilated, but the Federation had paid the price. Over 900 Terran warships destroyed, hundreds of thousands dead. Calloway's flagship, the TFS Vengeance, lost in action. Yet the Zalrith war machine was broken. The war had turned, and humanity was coming for their homeworld. A question for you. If you were in Calloway's place, would you have sacrificed the fleet for victory, or pulled back to fight another day? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Enjoying this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic HFY sci-fi adventures. The road to vengeance. The war had consumed the stars for nearly a decade. Entire species had fallen. Planets were turned to cinders. The Zalrith Dominion, once an empire of unstoppable might, now stood on the brink of total collapse. The Battle of Kezar Rift had shattered their last great fleet. Their war machine was crippled, their supply lines devastated. Now humanity prepared to strike the final blow. There would be no surrender, no peace talks, no mercy. The Zalrith homeworld, Eshar Prime, would fall. and the galaxy would remember this day forever. The march to Kezar Prime. The Terran armada forged in the crucible of war had gathered its largest fleet ever assembled. 1,500 Terran warships, battle-hardened, upgraded, unstoppable. Millions of soldiers, marines, and helljumpers, ready for planetary invasion. Experimental weapons, railgun bombardments, and orbital strike platforms. Enough firepower to erase an entire world. At the head of the fleet, Admiral Cassandra Wolfe stood aboard the TFS Nemesis, humanity's new flagship. She had fought in the trenches. She had lost friends, comrades, entire worlds. And she had made a vow. We end this war today. The order was given. The fleet jumped to Kezar Prime. The last stand of the Dominion Kezar Prime, the heart of the Zalrith Dominion, had once been a symbol of eternal rule. Now it was a tomb waiting to be sealed. The last defenders of the Dominion had gathered. 2,000 warships, the remnants of a once invincible navy, planetary defense grids, mass driver cannons, plasma artillery, and orbital fortresses. Billions of Zalrith warriors, armed, desperate, knowing that defeat meant extinction. The Zalrith Emperor stood in his war chamber, staring at the holomap. His claws dug into the stone table. "They dare come to our home," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage and fear. A warlord approached. "Orders, my emperor?" The ruler of the Zalrith closed his eyes. For centuries, their empire had crushed all resistance. For centuries, they had ruled through fear. Now they were the ones afraid. His voice was barely a whisper. "Kill them all." The battle for Kezar Prime. The sky over Kezar Prime became a hellscape of fire and death. Terran warships unleashed nuclear salvos and railgun barrages. Entire squadrons of Zalrith vessels were ripped apart. Massive orbital bombardments struck the planet. Cities burned. The surface trembled. The sky itself turned red. Dropships, gunships, and hell-jumper pods rained from above. Soldiers hit the ground, engaging in brutal street-to-street combat. The Zalrith fought like cornered beasts, but humanity fought like survivors with nothing left to lose. The Terran Marines pushed forward, clearing strongholds, annihilating defenders, toppling statues of the Dominion's past rulers. They weren't conquering, they were erasing an empire. The end of the Emperor. Deep within the shattered Zalrith High Palace, the Emperor stood alone. The roar of battle echoed in the distance. His palace guards were dead, his warlords were gone. The great Zalrith Dominion was no more. A sound echoed down the corridor, the slow, deliberate steps of a Terran soldier. The doors were kicked open, and there, standing before him, was Captain Elias Carter. The human soldier raised his rifle. The Emperor stared at him, his golden robes covered in dust. "You were supposed to be weak," he whispered. Carter's voice was calm. "That was your first mistake. A single gunshot ended an empire." The final transmission. The Terran Federation's message to the galaxy was simple. The war is over. The Dominion is gone. Humanity stands victorious. Some species cheered. Others watched in horror. The unstoppable Zalrith had been erased. And now, a new power ruled the stars. The final blow had been struck, and the galaxy would never be the same. A question for you: would you have spared the Zalrith leadership or ensured they could never rise again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Enjoying this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more epic HFY sci-fi adventures. After the firestorm, the war was over. The Zalrith Dominion, once the most feared empire in the galaxy, was gone. Their fleets lay in ruins, their homeworld a lifeless husk, their warlords either dead or in chains. Humanity, the species once seen as an insignificant newcomer, now stood alone at the top. But victory came with a cost. Entire Terran fleets had been lost. Planets burned, millions were dead. The galaxy was fractured. Now the question remained: What came next? The Council of Sol. The leaders of the Terran Federation gathered in Unity Station, orbiting Earth. President Elias Grant stood at the war table, the weight of history pressing down upon him. Across from him sat representatives from dozens of species, former subjects of the Zalrith, now free for the first time in generations. Some were grateful to humanity, others were terrified. For the first time in history, they feared something more than the Zalrith. They feared Earth. The debate humanity had two choices: rule with an iron fist, take control of the galaxy, establish the Terran Empire, and ensure no species ever threatens Earth again. Lead through unity, forge an alliance of equals, bringing the shattered remnants of the galaxy together under a new banner. The room erupted into arguments. General Cassandra Wolfe slammed her fist on the table. We bled for this victory. If we don't seize control, someone else will, and they won't be as merciful as we are. Fleet Admiral Anton Beckett shook his head. And then what? We become the next Dominion, the next tyrants? We fought for freedom, not conquest. The room fell into silence, and then President Grant spoke. We will not rule by fear. His voice was quiet, but absolute. He looked around the room, eyes heavy with the weight of history. We will not become the monsters we fought. The birth of the Orion Pact. And so a new order was born. The Orion Pact, a coalition of species forged in the ashes of war, dedicated to peace and mutual defense. Humanity would stand as its guardian, not its master. The galaxy would no longer bow to tyrants. For the first time, there was hope. The shadows remain, but not all were satisfied. In the void of space, survivors of the Zalrith war machine vanished into the darkness. Warlords, mercenaries, those who refused to kneel. They whispered of revenge. They swore that Earth would burn. And somewhere, in the far reaches of space, a new enemy watched, waiting. And so, humanity rose from the brink of annihilation to become the galaxy's greatest power. But power always comes at a cost, and in the shadows, new threats stir. What do you think? If you were in charge, would you have ruled as conquerors or united the galaxy under peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Love HFY stories? Then you're in the right place. Subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic sci-fi adventures, space warfare, and humanity's triumphs. Hit like, share, and subscribe to support the channel and never miss a new story. More HFY greatness is coming soon. Stay tuned, warriors. Humanity does not kneel.